Hey friends, tonight we're heading back in time, not to the feasts, not to the nights, but to the forgotten survival tricks that kept people alive in a world where Google didn't exist and bandits definitely did. So before we begin, take a moment to breathe out, let the day fall behind you like a flaming haycart rolling downhill. Now dim the lights, settle under your blanket, and get ready for a slow journey through medieval half broken and weirdly effective. In the modern world, we carry power in our pockets, phones, batteries, tiny flashlights with more lumens than necessary. If you wanted power, you carried fire. But in the Middle Ages, enter the ember pouch, a small, smoldering miracle that turned a spark into a portable survival tool. Here's how it worked. You'd take a glowing coal from your hearth, usually charcoal land, wrap it in dried moss, fungus, or linen soaked in saltpeter or animal fat. Just a slow, steady smolder that lasted for hours, sometimes even a full day. Then you've tucked it into a hollow horn or a fireproof pouch made of stitched leather. No flames. Need to cook. Shelter. Signal help with smoke. Pull out your ember pouch, give it a breath, and boom, instant fire. More like gentle encouragement and patient whispering, but still faster than flint. Well, not instant. Today's preppers might have magnesium strikers or fire starter cubes. Medieval folks had moss, fat, and an unhealthy relationship with open flames, and somehow it worked. Fencing in the Middle Ages was less about pick and more about planting your problems. Let me introduce you to the living fence, a security system you couldn't climb, burn, or budget for on Etsy. Unlike wooden fences, which rotted and fell over, living fences healed themselves and produced berries, bird nests, and very judgmental squirrels. You'd start with bendy, fast-growing trees, willow, hazel, hawthorn. Now it's a hedge, a defense system, and a passive-aggressive deterrent for that one neighbor with boundary issues. Then you'd plant them close together, and instead of letting them grow straight up like normal, respectable trees, you'd bend and weave their branches sideways into a tangled hedge. Lettuce leftovers, that sauce bottle you forgot to throw out in 2019. This process was called laying a hedge, and the result, a barrier so thick and thorny, even pigs gave up and turned around. Bonus, the fence stayed alive. As it grew, it got stronger. Want to get fancy, add blackthorn or briar. Medieval farmers didn't just build walls. They cultivated fortresses, tucked up into the rafters, hidden away like a forbidden snack. Today, we refrigerate everything. But in medieval villages, meat preservation was an art form, and its name was smoke, not the fancy barbecue kind. We're talking thick, acrid, medieval smoke, the kind that smelled like pine and despair. Here's what they did. They'd hang salted cuts of meat, pork, fish, whatever didn't run fast enough behind the hearth fire, not over it. Behind it, why there? Because that's where the cool smoke drifted, slow, steady, perfect for drying without cooking. Over days, weeks, or months, the smoke would dry out the meat, kill bacteria, repel insects, and infuse the ham with the flavor of survival, also known as slightly burned desperation. It was so effective that smoked meat could last through winter, through famine, and possibly through a siege, though you'd be too tired to chew it by spring. And while it dried, it also warmed the house and confused birds, because if you're breaking into a cottage and a smoked leg of mutton falls on your head, you reevaluate your life. So tell me in the comments, would you carry burning moss in a pouch? Would you grow a hedge just to keep your goats in check? And would you eat meat that had been hanging above someone's fireplace for 5 months in a plague? And somehow, it kept butter colder than your landlord's heart. Be honest, you're among friends, and possibly squirrels. Before refrigerators or even the icebox, people still had milk to keep cold, stew to preserve, and butter they didn't want melting into sadness. But to really stay dry, people rubbed their cloaks with lanolin, a natural grease found in sheep's wool or a mix of animal fats and bees. So how'd they do it? With clay. Medieval homes used unglazed clay pots, sometimes layered inside bigger pots with water sandwiched between, what we now call Zia pots, or evaporative coolers. Here's how it worked. The outer pot was filled with water. As that water slowly evaporated through the porous clay, it absorbed heat from the inner pot, cooling it naturally. No ice, no electricity, just physics with mud. People used these for milk, cheese, and leftovers, though leftovers usually meant a half onion I didn't eat today. Even better, the pots were cheap, durable, and doubled as cookware, storage, or, in a pinch, a hat. It's not hype. Snow, emotional, betrayal. The medieval peasant had one answer. The oiled cloak. Wool was already warm and water-resistant. Suddenly, your itchy wool blanket became a survival poncho that repelled water, wind, and awkward conversations at market. And these weren't just for peasants. Hunters, pilgrims, and traveling monks relied on waterproofed cloaks that doubled as bedding, tents, and, if folded creatively, emotional support. Blanket said. Did they smell weird? Yes. Did they work? Also yes. Modern outdoor brands spend millions replicating what medieval shepherds achieved with sheep oil and a bad attitude. So next time your jacket gets soaked in the rain, just remember, Somewhere, a 12th century farmer stayed dry with a slab of wax and no regrets. Getting injured in medieval times was unfortunate. Doctors were rare, bandages were optional, and the only thing sterile was the social interaction. But people still survived with the help of natural first aid kits that weirdly worked. Let's start with moss, specifically sphagnum moss. It's soft, absorbent, mildly antiseptic, and perfect for dressing wounds. People packed it into gashes to stop bleeding and reduce infection. It was basically the medieval band-aid, except biodegradable and covered in bugs. Then there's honey, nature's disinfectant. Honey kills bacteria, seals wounds, and promotes healing. It was spread over cuts, burns, and even surgical sites. Plus, if it didn't work, at least it tasted better than moss. Other items in the kit included yarrow for clotting, garlic for infections, wine for cleaning wounds, and cobwebs, yes, spiderwebs for clotting and covering scratches. Today, we have gauze in the... They had moss, honey, and vibes. And honestly, they made it work. You've got a cut on your arm, do you smear it with honey? Pack it with moss, slap a spiderweb on it, and hope for the best. Tell me in the comments what you'd choose. Bonus points if your medieval first aid kit includes garlic and passive aggression. You find a shady spot, dig a deep hole about waist, heightened line it with straw, clay, or wooden boards. Then, you layer your food inside. Root veggies, fruits, dried meats. Cover it with more straw, maybe some leaves, and top it with a wooden lid, a heavy stone, and a silent prayer against rodents. Imagine this. It's You've got a few root vegetables left, a hunk of smoked pork, and exactly 0 refrigeration. What do you do? You dig a cold pit, also known as a medieval root cellar's humble cousin. It's shockingly simple, and sometimes you just needed bread now, even if it came with extra crunch. Why it worked? Below a certain depth, the ground maintains a cool, stable temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. That's enough to keep produce crisp and meat from mute. People even used these pits to store snow and ice in winter. Yes, medieval folks invented summer ice cream storage with dirt and determination. When finished, you'd brush off the ash, break it open, and ignore the smoky crunch. Today, we pay extra for off-grid freezers. They had a hole, some straw, and absolutely 0 HOA complaints. Medieval folks didn't always have ovens. In fact, most peasants couldn't afford one. Enter the ash cake. You found a pond. You don't want this. You're spiritually aligned with every medieval field worker who ever whispered, "Close enough." This survival bread was made from basic dough flour, water, and a pinch of salt if you had it. Sometimes barley, rye, or even acorns. You'd pat it flat like a sad pancake and place it directly onto hot ashes or coals. No pan, no plate. The sand and cloth called particles. It cooked slowly, hardening on the outside while steaming within. Others were homemade stacks inside old barrels. And here's the twist. These flatbreads were actually nutritious. They stored well, traveled light, and paired beautifully with whatever didn't rot in the last 24 hours. If you've ever burned a grilled cheese and eaten it anyway, pour water through the top, and by the time it trickled out the bottom, it was cleaner, clearer, and significantly less squirmy. No tools, no fridge, no tap. Congratulations. Let's say you're thirsty. What now? Charcoal. Long before breeder filters and overpriced hydration tablets, people used charcoal sand filters to purify their water. It worked like this. You'd lay a cloth, fine sand, gravel, and crushed charcoal inside a barrel or pottery container. Bonus points if your strategy includes sarcasm and at least one suspicious onion. The charcoal absorbed odors and bacteria. The result? Drinkable-ish water that probably wouldn't betray you. Some filters were built into ceramic pots, and yes, you still boiled the water afterward unless you enjoyed hallucinating frogs with top hats. Today, we pay hundreds for fancy filters. They had firewood, dirt, and blind optimism, and somehow, it kept them going. So you're out in the wild. What's your survival move? Dig a cold pit for your food, slap some dough in the fire and pray, make a charcoal filter and hope the frogs stay fictional. Let me know in the comments. Security in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly advanced. No cameras, no locks with Wi-Fi, no smart devices constantly listening to you breathe. So what did people use? Geese. Yes, goose, the animal. Honks like a trumpet, flaps like a maniac, and holds grudges like a seasoned medieval baron. Geese were placed around homes, barns, and village perimeters, not for eggs or meat but for security. Because if someone even thought about sneaking through your yard, the geese would go off like feathery sirens. They were aggressive, territorial, loud, and alarmingly judgmental. A good flock of geese could detect intruders, wake up the entire house, and sometimes even chase off thieves. All the time. And they hated everyone equally. Dogs, sure, but geese didn't get distracted by smells or naps. They were on the clock. In fact, the Romans once credited a gaggle of sacred geese with saving their city from invasion. So if you think modern security systems are intense, just know someone once said, "Trust the geese." And it worked. Medieval winters were brutal. Cold air seeped in through stone walls. Windows were just glorified holes with cloth curtains. You'd sleep fully clothed, often wearing 2 tunics, a cloak, a hat, and whatever dignity you could salvage. And firewood was a daily gamble between warm and alive. So how did people make it? With layers, clever architecture, and body heat economics. Families often shared one room and one bed. Not just for fun, but for warmth. Blankets were heavy, stuffed with wool or straw. Floors were strewn with rushes to insulate. Some homes even brought the animals inside at night: cows, chickens, the occasional judgmental goat. Because if your feet are cold, nothing says comfy like sleeping next to a warm dairy producer. They also used bed curtains to trap heat around sleepers, and small clay pots bed warmers filled with coals or hot stones. Carefully. Unless you liked drama, there was no thermostat, just ingenuity, fur, and the unspoken rule that whoever moved the blanket lost it. Our final survival technique isn't physical, it's psychological. When danger came, raiders, soldiers, plague patrols, sometimes the best survival strategy was simply to disappear. Entire households practiced strategic silence. Lights were doused, fires covered, children hushed. People would sit in complete stillness for hours, sometimes overnight, hoping invaders would pass by. Walls were thick, cellars were dug, even full stores were built tiny escape tunnels under floorboards or behind tapestries. In rural areas, families built ditch shelters camouflaged with moss and branches, barely big enough for a few people to crouch inside. The goal wasn't comfort, it was absence. No footprints, no noise, no firelight visible from the road. It was survival by erasure, becoming invisible in your own home. Quiet was protection. Stillness was armor. And often it worked. This wasn't just hiding, it was medieval stealth mode. And it saved lives. So now that you've made it through moss bandages, ash cakes, freezing winters, and angry geese, which medieval survival trick impressed you the most? Carrying fire in a pouch, building a cold pit, sleeping like a burrito beside your cow? Tell me in the comments on name your imaginary medieval prepper kit. Sometimes decades. Mine comes with honey, a flask of wine, and 3 emotionally supportive chickens. Let's talk about food that never dies. Today we have protein bars, trail mix, and vacuum-sealed meals with shelf lives that outlive your house. But in the Middle Ages they had hardtack, aka edible stone. Hardtack was a biscuit made of flour and water, baked until it achieved the texture of regret. No yeast, no butter, no joy. It was dried so thoroughly that it could last years. You didn't bite into hardtack, you negotiated with it. Sailors soaked it in beer to soften it. Soldiers hammered it into crumbs and mixed it into porridge. And yes, people sometimes broke their teeth on it because medieval dentistry was mostly prayer-based. Again, alongside you had dried peas, lightweight, easy to store, and rehydrated into what can best be described as a warm, beige experience. Peas were the chicken nuggets of medieval survival food. Not exciting, but always there. Then there was traveling gruel flour, or crushed grain mixed with water, milk, or broth, and boiled into a sort of slurpable paste. If that sounds depressing, it was also digestible, cheap, and full of slow-burning calories. Together, this trio was the medieval equivalent of a survival ration pack. No flavor, no variety, but no starvation either. Sometimes survival means learning to love food that doesn't love you back. Let's say you cut your hand stacking firewood, or your foot met a rusty nail, or you were stabbed. Medieval medicine didn't have painkillers or antibiotics, but it did have moss, honey, and the creativity of the desperate. First, sphagnum moss. It's soft, absorbent, naturally antiseptic, and shockingly good at stopping bleeding. It worked like a sponge, pulling moisture from wounds while reducing bacteria. By now, we know that medieval folks didn't sleep straight through the night. They slept in 2 phases. First sleep, a short wakeful period, then second sleep. But what did they do in that strange midnight gap? That time was called the watch, and it wasn't wasted. People prayed, they read scripture, some even visited neighbors because, yes, impromptu midnight visits were a thing. Others stayed in bed reflecting, writing, or simply watching the hearth glow in silence. It was peaceful, slow, meditative. In fact, modern sleep research shows that waking briefly in the night is completely natural. It's how our circadian rhythm was originally wired. The pressure to sleep 8 hours straight is new medieval brains. They were just chilling between dreams. They used that quiet space to reset their thoughts, whisper to their spouses, or get up and add more wood to the fire. Sometimes they'd even snack. That's right, medieval. Midnight snacking was canon. So next time you wake up at 2 a.m. for no reason, congratulate yourself. You're spiritually aligned with a 14th century baker having oat gruel under a blanket. Mental survival isn't always about tools or shelter. Sometimes it's about not breaking when everything around you is falling apart. And for that, medieval folks, especially monks, had a sister. The monastic rule of life included silence, routine, manual labor, prayer, and minimal possessions. Why? Because it kept the mind focused and the heart from spiraling. In times of grief, plague, war, or famine, many turned to monasteries not just for shelter but for structure. Even outside the cloister, families developed rhythm. Morning chores, midday rest, evening fire rituals, Sunday as sacred pause, and specific chants or prayers for everything from birth to harvest. Prayer. These routines grounded people when the world felt unstable. Some even practiced contemplative stillness, sitting in quiet, watching the shadows move across a stone wall, or simply listening to wind against the shutters. It wasn't meditation as we know it, but it served the same purpose. Slow the mind, soothe the nerves, survive the noise of silence by embracing it. Here's one of the most underrated medieval survival strategies. They slowed down, on purpose. In winter, when the fields froze and the sun disappeared by late afternoon, people didn't try to force productivity. They curled up, they rested, they waited. Peasants hibernated, socialists staying indoors, napping more, eating preserved foods, and conserving energy like forest animals with anxiety. No one expected full workloads. Even noble courts reduced events. Work shifted from labor to mending, storytelling, weaving, and sleeping, as long as daylight allowed. You weren't lazy, you were seasonally efficient. This idea called wintering has regained popularity recently, but medieval folks knew it instinctively. When the land rests, so should you. Doing less wasn't failure, it was survival. So if you've ever felt guilty for slowing down in December, consider this your permission slip from the 13th century. Let's begin where comfort often ends. The bugs, fleas, lice, and biting flies were more than annoyances, they were health hazards. The resulting smoke drove insects away from crops, livestock, and people alike. So how did medieval survivors cope without bug spray, citronella, or screens? They smoked everything. Floor rushes were infused with mint and rosemary. Smoke huts were built beside homes and animal shelters. Herbs were burned too: lavender, sage, mugwort, and bay leaves, all chosen for their strong scent and symbolic protection. Clothing was stuffed with dried herbs. People even wove herbal wreaths and hung them from beams. Doorways or beds were often framed in nettle or wormwood garlands. Not exactly cozy, but highly effective. In the absence of sprays, they created an atmosphere so pungent, no living creature, human or insect, wanted to linger too long. It was part survival, part scent war, and somehow it worked. Rain in the Middle Ages wasn't just inconvenient, it was a test of your dignity, patience, and waterproofing skills. Most peasants didn't have raincoats. They had cloaks, heavy wool or linen rectangles, sometimes treated with fat or wax to resist water. A dry monk was not the one who outran the storm, but the one who planned for stillness. To stay dry, they also built portable shelters out of nothing more than bent branches, bracken, and hide. Hunters and shepherds often slept beneath lean-to structures, their cloaks stretched like tops between trees. In open fields, large stones were placed to divert wind. Some carried folded reed mats on their backs, not for comfort, but to use as instant roofing. And then there were the monks who perfected the art of cloistering, not just in buildings but in mindset. They didn't fight the weather, they outlasted it. Because sometimes surviving meant knowing when to move and when to just sit, wrapped in wool, watching the rain. We've covered food, fire, shelter, and health. But let's be honest, loneliness was its own kind of survival challenge. Long winters, empty roads, quiet nights. So how did people stay mentally intact? They sang soft, simple, repetitive songs, many passed down orally from grandmothers, shepherds, or pilgrims. Some songs were work chants, others were prayers set to melody. Many were nonsense rhymes designed to fill the silence and occupy the mind. Short, strange puzzles shared at night, often about nature, tools, or body parts. Riddles sharpened memory and passed time in the dark. They also told riddles. And then there were memory games, naming saints in alphabetical order, recalling every village in a valley, retelling a parable backward, reciting herbs used in healing spells. There were cognitive tools, keeping the mind limber, sharp, and curious. Because when you're snowed in for weeks with only turnips and regret, a good riddle can feel like a miracle. The quietest survival technique of all. Not reacting, not moving, just observing like monks did from cloister windows or peasants did from frozen fields. They learned to read the sky, to guess the time, the wind, to predict a storm. The bark of dogs, to track danger. The behavior of birds, to find food or shelter. Children were taught to stare at flames and name the colors, to trace the edges of shadows, to notice the twitch of leaves. This wasn't boredom, it was training. It brought the mind into the present, and it taught them patience, rhythm, and calm. Observation slowed the heartbeat. It connected the watcher to the world without needing to act. Today, we'd call it mindfulness. They called it life. And in a world that required constant adaptation, it was the one stillness that prepared you for everything. Here we are at the end of this long, quiet walk through forgotten survival. You've learned about ember pouches and ash cakes. You've layered wool cloaks in smoky lean-tos and filtered water through sand. You've buried potatoes in pits, brushed your teeth with charcoal, and made friends with guard geese and garlic. But the real secret of survival, it wasn't just tools, or tricks, or toughness. It was trust in the body, the earth, the rhythm of the day. It was kindness to your tired limbs, to your hungry neighbor, to your frightened child. It was adaptability, the quiet art of changing without complaint. The strength to do what you could, and rest when you couldn't. The medieval world was harsh, but it wasn't joyless. There were laughs, lullabies, and love in the middle of the chaos. And every survival technique, no matter how rough, carried a whisper of wisdom. You are built to keep going, and to rest, and to rise again when the time is right. So now, as this story closes, let your body soften into the blankets. Let your breath slow. Let the room darken like the stone walls of a warm cottage, and sleep with the stillness of a hillside after snowfall quiet. Enduring, whole. You've made it through the storm. You are safe. You are healthy. You can rest now.